Hello friends, welcome to another video, and in this video we are going to discuss a great character created by uh, one of the very best writers of French literature, Paul Valery. So yeah, just let me tell you once more. Paul Valery was one of the great writers in French, but he never got the Nobel Prize. But he was nominated for the Nobel Prize for I think 2 or 3 times, Nobel Prize in Literature. And many people called him as a great poet of French. But he didn't write a single poem for almost 20 years. So he was, you can say, a little bit idiosyncratic or eccentric also, you can say. Okay, so here it is. So here is the dialogue with the self. Paul Valery and Monsieur Teste. This article is written by Ernest Bevan Jr. So here it is. In Monsieur Teste, Paul Valery created a character who was to remain his cerebral conversation partner for most of the poet's literary life. I was trying to reduce myself to my real qualities. I had little confidence in my means and found within me, with no trouble at all I needed to despise myself. But I was strong in my infinite desire for clarity, in my contempt for convictions and idols, and in my distaste for facility, and in the sense of my limitations. I had made myself an inner island and spent my time exploring and fortifying it. Monsieur Teste was born one day of a memory, then recent of those moods. So here Valery is saying of how he created Monsieur Teste, what made him find this character. So in the one way, this character was born from his attempt to look within himself and find out his real qualities. So this, you can say, it's quite autobiographical, but not in the sense that it's not a memory or not a remaining of his old self. This is a unique process, all right. So this is something new. Let's see what happened. Conceived in 1895 while Valery studied law at the University of Montpellier, Teste was introduced to the French public in 1896 with the publication of La Soirée avec Monsieur Teste. No more was heard from this creature of pure intellect until 1924, when La Lettre d'Amélie Teste and La Lettre d'un Ami appeared, followed in 1925 by Les Ardeurs du Laubourg. When Valery died in July 1945, he left a series of 5 fragments involving Teste, which were included in the 1948 Gallimard edition of Monsieur Teste. The Teste cycle, as it is known today, is composed of the 4 complete and the 5 incomplete sketches contained in that 1948 edition. Since it spans virtually the whole of Valery's career, the Teste cycle presents some unusual evaluative problems. Most commentators have been quick to note the autobiographical elements of the work, but have too readily identified Teste with Valery, only to let the problem rest. So he is saying here that 5 cycles were there in Valery's time. Valery was a writer and a poet, but there were some 4 cycles, and many people identified Monsieur Teste with Valery himself. Whether it is justified or not, let's see. Teste is simply the most persistent image of that unknown man, his author's consciousness. But since Teste was also a vehicle for Valery's exploration of his own consciousness, and since that exploration was a lifelong process, one might reasonably expect that Valery's discoveries would serve to alter his vision of Teste. In fact, the poet's view of Teste, his view of the possibilities of a figure living by pure consciousness and pure intellect, did change. The Teste of 1924 was not the Teste of 1896. When Valery had renounced poetry at Genova in 1892, so this was what I was telling you about, right? He didn't write poetry for almost 2 decades. He had gone so out of a dissatisfaction with poetry's capacity to satisfy his demands to know himself. All of his life, he maintained this primary interest in self-knowledge, and when he abandoned poetry, it was because the need to explore the processes which generated literary works was greater than the desire to create those works. So quite important, right? He wanted to know, Paul Valery wanted to know what are the processes which make one's mind become a channel for creating this creative activity of poetry. So his interest was in self-understanding, and he wanted to find out what process of creation is when a poet writes his words. It's not on the surface, it's a deep process. Okay, so La Soirée avec Monsieur Teste, as well as the Introduction à la méthode de Leonardo da Vinci, allowed him to examine the functionings of the mind. Yet the Teste figure was still alive when Valery resumed his poetry in 1912. So from 1892 to 1912, he didn't wrote a single poem, because he wanted to understand what makes him write a poem, what makes him a poet, what are the invisible processes going on within his mind. So how Valery's attitude toward Teste had shifted, how he had come to view the possibility that a man could live by pure intellect, and what he saw pure intellect as including. These are my concerns here. It's what Mr. Bevan is saying. The pursuit of self-knowledge which occupied Paul Valery was never a pursuit that divorced the writer from the world. Stereotypes of the inner-directed seeker, shutting his monastic gates on life's banalities, have no bearing on Valery's domain. What mattered to Valery was the question of how far man can understand those inner processes which mold his perceptual and sensual experiences into ideas and attitudes that in turn help form his self. The poet was exploring the process of transformation, how the external world is received and reshaped by internal mechanisms. His greatest poetry hinged on on this transformation process. La Cimetière Marine, for instance, converts years of experience on the Mediterranean coast into a hazy poetic realm in which few of the visions are fixed, and all that is seen gives rise to speculation of life and death. And the Song of Master Idea examines the strength of an idea over its creator. Okay. Valery's principal theoretical interest was with those mental operations which occur between the visual sensual experience and its transformed product, be that product a poem or an idea. Quite interesting, right? I was telling you about how to find your interest, and when you may think that you are going to lose something if you don't write a competitive exam, if you don't be part of the race. Are you going to really lose something if you don't understand yourself and you just blindly follow the competition? What is going to be your loss? Is your competition with them, or is your competition with you? But what is the you which you are forgetting by being part of the race? That's what I was talking about, okay? The narrator considers Testy a person whose mind seemed to transform to its own use all that is, a mind that performed everything suggested to it. In order to portray Testy believably, Valery places him in a social context and looks at him from several angles. The narrator, the Valery persona, shares Testy's concern and is fascinated by the man's powers of insight and self-control. Often his voice is hardly distinguishable from Testy's. Emily Testy, the wife, reveals something of the sensual, moody side of her husband. So Emily is the fictional character, Monsieur Testy's wife. Okay, so she reveals the moody side of her husband. The master's young friend in La Lettre d'un Ami hints at the influence Testy has over him when the latter describes an entry into Paris in an self-conscious style, revealing his own concern with mental workings. Finally, there is Testy himself in his logbooks, formulating theories, spouting epithets, and occasionally contradicting other characters' views. Okay. To understand exactly what Valery created in Testy, one must first recognize some of the crucial affinities between the author and his creation. Now, Monsieur Testy's affinities with the creator, Paul Valery, is being considered. The Testy cycle demands such a personal approach. Testy, though a careful, shaped fictional construct, was created by Valery largely for the purpose of developing his ideas about how a man who knew only two values, the possible and the impossible, would behave. Wow! Wow! As the poet said of Testy, it is in this that he resembles me, much as a child resembles a father who at the moment of conceiving him was himself undergoing a profound change of being and was not himself. The Valery Testy similarities begin in such details as the plan of Testy's apartment. Okay. So what was the Testy's apartment like? How was the chamber? There was only a candle, and sitting around it, the dull. Sorry, I'm little more on time.